It's a summer afternoon and a young child is watching Spider-Man 2 on their beat-up portable DVD player, sitting in the back seat on their way to the thrift store with their parents. Once there, the child takes their usual route, skimming through clothing that doesn't interest them, glancing through the toy sections in search of any golden treasures. No, they don't find any this time, so they end up heading on to their personal library at the edge of the store. Sitting there, they skim through the colorful books as their parents go about the store. Out of the corner of their eye, they note a shelf with comic books lined up. Something they've never seen before here. They're an assortment of Iron Man comic books with bright colors and high issue numbers. So they take one randomly and open up and start reading. Before this, the only exposure that child had was an Iron Man movie that they saw last summer, and the Nickelodeon cartoon running at the time. Now I ask you, dear viewer, how lost do you think that child was reading the story? That child was me, and the comic book was Invincible Iron Man number 20. It might surprise you to know that I wasn't completely lost even with my sparse knowledge. Tony Stark was dead, Norman Osborn took over S.H.I.E.L.D. and renamed it to Hammer, Tony put himself into a vegetative state to hide the secrets away from him. Now his loved ones had to figure out how to bring him back. This begs the question, how did I figure it out so quickly? Well, I didn't have to. The comic book wrote it all out in the opening page. Suddenly I went from lost to completely understanding the context of the story that I picked up. This is all thanks to an ideology introduced by Stan Lee that permeates through Marvel Comics to this day. Every issue is someone's first issue. Today I'm going to take this ideology and apply it to Magic's storytelling and Magic's game mechanics. From there, I will use that analysis to defend my belief that Sagas are the absolute pinnacle of Magic card design. The core of the every issue is someone's first issue ideology is that if a new or returning reader picks up a comic book for the first time, any comic book, regardless of if it's Miss Marvel number 1, Iron Man number 20, or even Squirrel Girl number 40, the singular comic book should always bring the reader up to speed enough so they're never confused about what they're about to read. The main goal of this is that it makes every single comic accessible to a wider audience. It breaks down the barrier of entry that is prior knowledge. There's still cost, of course, but that's a whole different discussion that we simply don't have time for today. So now, let's turn to Magic the Gathering. But this time, let's keep in mind that every Magic set is someone's first Magic set. Take a moment to look back at the first Magic set you've ever played with. How easy was it for you to grasp the storyline and context without having to have someone more in franchise explain it to you? I'll take the risk and assume it wasn't easy at all. My first experience with Magic was buying a Core 2015 Deck Builder's Toolkit and building a Minotaur deck to play against my best friend. After this, I went to a Magic Origins beginner draft and went 3-1 with Black-Green Elves. I remember a few things from that day. I remember slamming down Shaman of the Pact for game on multiple occasions. I remember the custom tokens given out because it was a charity event for a local animal shelter. But I remember absolutely nothing about the story. I had no idea what was happening. I didn't even know Magic had a story to begin with. After this, I built 2 commander decks and dropped Magic altogether for a few years. Fast forward to late 2017 and I'm pacing around Walmart and out of the corner of my eye, I see an excellent fat pack sitting on the shelf. I'm drawn by what at the time I thought was a Medusa, and a dinosaur being written with pirates staring at the oncoming danger. Instantly hooked, I bought it and took it home and opened it up. I was met with 10 booster packs, a spin down dice counter, a land pack, and a booklet. This booklet, as most of you know, comes packaged with every single fat pack and comes with images of every card in the set. But before you get to the cards themselves, there's a whole section of the book dedicated to small establishing paragraphs that tell the origins and motivations of the 4 factions within the set. This instantly brought me up to speed to understand the immediate story. Sure, I didn't know that Jace was almost murdered by Vraska, I didn't know who Nicol Bolas was, but I knew that Jace lost his memory, and that there was a valuable prize to be found. So valuable that 4 opposing factions were going to fight for it throughout the entire set. And that's really all I needed to know as a new player to understand that one set. So problem solved, right? Just use this booklet as an on-ramp for all sets to the story. Well, no, not quite. There are 2 main problems with the solution. The first is that this on-ramp to the story is stuck behind a $35 to $40 paywall inside of a product that isn't designed for newer players. If this booklet was found inside of the Deck Builder's Toolkit, then it would be slightly better, but still not as elegant a solution as the summaries at the start of every comic book. The second main problem is that we're talking about Ixalan, a set based around a plane that no one knew anything about, a plane that introduced a new creature type, and another that had barely any representation in over 2 decades. Story-wise, it only had 3 returning characters in Jace, Vraska, and Azor. Aside from this, Ixalan's story, while still working under the overarching plot of Bolas, is still self-contained. When we really look at it, it's almost perfect to introduce someone to Magic. easy to follow story, clearly defined factions and motivations, exciting new creature types, and mechanics that flavorfully tie in with those factions. And Raid shows the ferocity of the dinosaurs and what happens when you go near them. Raid and Treasure show what the pirates want and how they'll get it. Lifelink fits with vampires as well as the colonizing nature of the Legion. Merfolk gain hexproof as they hide in their natural habitat and boost each other off in Unity. Now, compare all of this to the aforementioned Magic Origins. Here you have five distinct and separate storylines about characters that have appeared in countless stories beforehand. Sure, this set was designed around being the origins of these characters, but normally origin stories in fictions focus on one character or one specific group of characters throughout the entire plot. Here we are given 5 stories with cards from 10 different planes. Any new player would be completely lost as to what is happening. If you want a good origin story for the Gatewatch, you're honestly better off with the Battle for Zendikar block, which had the singular story that ended with the faction of the team. So now we have 2 extremes to look at. Ixalan on one side is the near perfect example of a first set. You can lump in original Innistrad and Throne of Eldraine and this end as well. Both of them also had easy to grasp stories with mechanics that flavorfully and faithfully portrayed their worlds and characters. On the other extreme you have Magic Origins, and if you don't want to count it because it's a core set and because it technically really did explain the mechanics of Magic very well, we can look at Amonkhet. Sure, it's a new world with new mechanics and a creature type and a color we've never seen before, but it's not a story about Amonkhet as a plane nor about its people. It's a story about the Gatewatch trying to figure out what Nicol Bolas's plan is, with a B plot of Liliana's contract and a C plot of Gideon on the new season of American Gladiator. It even fails as an on-ramp to the Magic mechanics. While Origins had predefined draft archetypes based on evergreen mechanics, Amonkhet had Exert, brick counters, and Embalm built into all 5 colors. All of these mechanics were seen as so complex that Wizards of the Coast printed out punch-out tokens for the very first time in the game's history. These kinds of tokens were not used again until the absolute design embarrassment that was Ikoria Lair of Behemoths. But now I'm getting sidetracked. So we have a range of accessibility from absolutely terrible to near perfect, with every other Magic set made somewhere in between. Once again, to touch base, every single one of these Magic sets is someone's first Magic set. Our problem is, how do we make all of the sets moving forward as easy to approach by newer players as those in the best end of this extreme? The worst solution is to make every set be mechanically and narratively simple so as to make it easily digestible to all players. This is a terrible idea as it would breed creative stagnation and the game would start losing players fast. We would never have another War of the Spark, another Battle Bond, another Zendikar Rising. So ultimately, we need something that A, introduces the plane's history and sets the tonal theme of the story. B, summarizes the goals and motivations of the set's main characters. C, gives context to the events that take place within the set. D, connect these story elements to the core mechanics of the set. And E, do all of this legibly within the border of the cards without the need of any external source like articles, booklets, or novels. This sounds completely impossible, right? Well, how would you feel if I told you that Wizards of the Coast already designed this elegant solution?
So there she was, the outsider who challenged the goddess and corrupted her followers, standing atop a beast so vile it was like nothing you'd seen before. Across the sea stood the deity, ready to bring forth her divine providence.
Now before we get to that story, let's take a look at this one. We have someone that after years of hearing their friend talk about it, ends up getting interested in playing Magic the Gathering. Their friend, all excited, gives them one of their decks to play while they teach them the game. First, the player skims through their cards as the friend starts setting up the table to teach them the basics of the game. As their fingers flip through instants, sorceries, and lands, they get to one card that looks very different from all the rest, so out of curiosity, they pull the card out and take a closer look at it. Any Magic player would assume that the first thing they read was the name of a card, but they would only be half right. What that new player read was the title of a story, Kiora Best the Sea God. And with this and any other story, the purpose of the title is to hook the reader in with questions and guide their focus as they experience the story. A good example of this is Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? By Joyce Carol Oates. It asks the reader to look back on the life they've lived and contemplate where it is they're heading. With that context in place, the reader can then look at Connie's choices and see if they're heading in the same direction. The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe singles out the object that ultimately seals Fortunato's fate, yet it doesn't tell you what its role is. Very similarly, Kiora Best the Sea God gives the player the ending of the story, but not how. It actually brings up many questions. Who is Kiora? Who's the sea god? Why are they fighting? Are they the only god? And ultimately, what does it mean to be a god in the context of this game? Suddenly, without even realizing, the new player is hooked into the story. Following this, the reminder text identifies this card as a saga, a word not used for just any story, but reserved for only pivotal moments in history. In this context, think of it more as a subtitle to the overarching story. A new player may not know what an enchantment, lore counter, nor draw step is, but odds are they know what a saga is and how important that word is. From here, the art identifies the two main characters, Thassa up above where deities tend to be depicted in art pieces such as this, and Kiora down below in a sphere of her own. This shows the separation in both power and divinity between the two combatants. It also hints at them being from separate worlds. The only thing connecting them are the sea creatures they command beside them, but even though both circles are balanced by having one fighter and one creature each, the advantage Thassa holds is still shown by how both Krakens seem to be heading towards and attacking Kiora. Now, let's pause for a moment and see what this card has accomplished. With just a title, reminder text, and art, it has set the scene of the story. It introduced Thassa and Kiora as characters, but specifically referred to Thassa as the sea god, not just Thassa. Why is this? Well, on the surface level, it gives her name reverence and respect. A follower of Thassa scribing her conflicts wouldn't need to say her name to know who she was. But it also introduces the concept of not only a god, but multiple gods being present in this game and its story. Let's fast forward to the game being played and the new player actually playing the card. It is here where the elegancy of Sagas' design starts to shine through. The card has 3 effects, each one taking place over the course of 3 turns. The turns then become the flow of time as the spell resolves each effect, and the story moves forward. First, you summon the Kraken that will be used to fight, just as in the story. Then you overwhelm your opponent, making them unable to block your next attack. Now comes the conclusion of the story, where Kiora bests the sea god. Now what effect would portray the ending of a battle between a mortal and a god? Will the card destroy target god? Will it summon a swarm of creatures for an all-out attack, or deal direct damage? No, none. Instead you steal something, and then the story's over. For a vast majority of players, this is the end of their interaction with Kiora Best the Sea God. They'll continue playing and now understand Theros better than they would have before. They'll understand that there isn't only a god, but multiple. They'll also be aware that there are people who fight against them. They'll also understand the mechanics of blue in general, but also within this specific set. Blue is the color of Krakens and hexproof. It taps down permanents as control, and on occasion ends up stealing them. And later on, as they continue to play the game and they run into the card Thassa Deep Dwelling, and they'll understand more of her history as a character and where her mechanics come from. They'll recognize her from the Saga's artwork and know of her control over sea creatures as well as her ability to render opponents defenseless by tapping them down. Here the players are rewarded for noticing these things because now they can tell that Thassa is the one tapping creatures down in the second effect of the saga. Kiora Best the Sea God has now thematically and mechanically linked the previous stories and context of Theros with the current iterations of its characters, making the overall set easier to digest for newer players. Yet there still remain unanswered questions that this specific set never answers. Those being, who is Kiora? What was stolen? To most players, these questions either never pop up or they're simply discarded as they play on throughout the set's lifetime. But there is a sizable number of fans who will want to know what happened. This curiosity will lead them to looking up Kiora vs. Thassa online. Then they'll get taken to this story article from 2015 that tells in depth what occurred in the story depicted by the saga. From the summoning of Krakens to the control Thassa takes over all creatures, and then Kiora takes the Bident, and the story ends. Now we have not only a player of magic, but a scholar of its various stories. Now, while we deeply looked at Kiora Best the Sea God and how it ticks every box out of what's necessary to make every magic set a good introductory magic set, I don't want you to get the idea that it is the only example of a saga that is able to do this. If we look at Rite of Benzalog, Its effects mirror how many sacrifices had to be made to bring him back to life, and it gives you background on a character that we know will be seen in this plane. You look at Song of Freyalise and it gives you the backstory of a portion of one of the heroes of Dominaria. The Antiquities War takes you even further back into the fights of Urza and his brother. This trend doesn't stay with Dominaria and its thematic focus on history. It spreads forward into Theros Beyond Death when you look at Elspeth Conquers Death as the answer to how Elspeth is alive currently in the story, as well as how she gets the blade that she uses through Elspeth's Nightmare. You also get a glimpse of the history of Theros, even if you never played the original Theros block, with the Akroan War, the birth of Meletis, the triumph of Anax, and the Binding of the Titans. The Binding of the Titans specifically setting up the Titans that would come in and ruin entire format. But another lens that we can use to look at the effect that a saga can have on an entire set, picture them if they were in sets like Origins. Instead of having the Planeswalker cards be flip cards and then having their story told through articles or through scattered cards throughout the commons and uncommons, you instead had a Planeswalker card that was just a Planeswalker card, and then you had a saga that went alongside it that told the story. Imagine a 3-part black enchantment saga for Liliana, where the first step is her brother getting sick, the second step is her finding the answer, but the third step is him dying, and then having the Planeswalker card be there alongside it. Sagas could have actually brilliantly been used on Amonkhet by having the sagas printed in Amonkhet be corrupted versions of history. They, instead of telling the real history, told the history that Bolas implanted into the plane. And then come Hour of Devastation, you could have the sagas there tell the real story of what actually happens, tells how the original 2 gods died. Honestly, by just existing, sagas expand the limits of what storytelling can look like in Magic the Gathering. And that's kind of where I want to wrap things up, what I want to conclude on, and what I think makes sagas the best designed Magic card. And honestly, I could argue with you that they're the best designed cards in a card game, period, because they not only do what they're supposed to do as a card, they functionally do their job as game pieces, as long-term enchantments, but they transcend their usefulness as just game pieces because they also tell you a story. They connect the player to the plane that they're playing in, they give you background for the characters, for the planes, they give hints as to what's going to happen, they make you question and gather curiosity, and that curiosity leads some players to look deeper into the story and possibly find a deeper love for the game. And this is aside from the art pieces. Like, the artworks of sagas are gorgeous because they are not limited by needing to be either displays of a character or displays of a specific moment in time. We have seen sagas as the bloody side of a throne. We have seen sagas be hand-woven tapestries. We have seen them be marble etchings. We have seen them be grandiose statues. We have seen them be so much that a regular Magic card really can't without a very good reason. They are functional, they are beautiful, they are compact, they are focused, and above all else, they are pure design elegancy at their core.